Started to do the show. So in the beginning, the show started out as a relatively normal, boring show. And I'm sorry for the way I look, but it didn't get any better as the years went on. Times have changed. In our show now, everyone goes through a metal detector. You know, times have changed. But that, now, of course, we're known for the fights, but that first fight was clearly out of nowhere. And we didn't have another fight for quite some time. And then after a while, it just became part of the routine. Now people come on the show to fight. I think if you took those guests and put them on Oprah, they would sit there very polite. They would still have no teeth, but they would have to be very polite. I'm not allowed to know what the show's about. So when I go out every day, I have a card, and the card has the names of the guests, but that's it. That's why every segment always starts with me saying, so what's going on? Because I don't know, and my job is to then ask questions you would be asking at home, or to make jokes and, you know, try to be funny. So, but I don't know what the story is. Well, when this guy comes out, and I'm thinking, what, did we make this up? What? But he cut off his own organ, and we had the police reports, the hospital reports. So I told the story, and of course the crowd goes, ooh. And then I said at one point, just asking a question that, you know, thinking what would someone at home ask, I said, well, what did you do with it? And he said he flushed it down the toilet. Very interesting. The same thing. The audience went, like when I first said, you know, he cut off his organ, they go, oh, he flushed it down the toilet. Oh! Like that was the worst part. And I'm thinking, why does that upset? What was he going to do with it? You know, put it up on the mantle? And say that used to be me? I don't know. But what struck me about that show is we're dealing with real life. I mean, when the show, and I said it on the show, when it's over, we're all going home. We'll probably talk about it tonight, you know, tell our significant others or whatever, you know, gee, you wouldn't believe what I saw today. But then we go on with our lives. This guy's going home without a penis.
He came with that one too.
There you go. He didn't upgrade. So,
no free gifts.
Yeah. So you feel, to that extent, for some of these issues, look, 90% of the issues we do aren't serious. It's about dating. Yeah, you're unhappy at the moment, but the next day they're dating someone else. So even though they get really angry, it's not life-changing. But obviously this guy was involved in a story that was life-changing. And I'm thinking, he didn't want this gay guy to stalk him anymore. Well, why not just change your number? You know, become unlisted. Don't do that. I came out against that. Just in case there was, I wasn't endorsing it. No, it was wrong. And what's, you know, again, this is a story you think, wait a second, that's made up. But it was a newspaper story. He lived outside of St. Louis, about 50 miles outside of St. Louis. And when you went to his home, his hallways were extra wide so the horse could, you know, navigate up and down the hallways. And he literally lived indoors with his horse. And we did a follow-up show, but the horse left him. Those horses are so judgmental. No, but they left him. She said he was hung like a man. I don't know. That's bad. That's wrong. That's wrong.
We'll move on to the next.
That's not appropriate. That's not appropriate. But this really was, in the 17 years, it was the sickest show. In fact, in fairness, lots of markets wouldn't run it. And I can't say that I blame them. You know, each market makes its own decision. But again, I show up, and there's the show, and we're not allowed to have censorship, and I wouldn't want to be a part of a show that had censorship. So as long as it's real, and as long as it's outrageous, it's entitled to be on. And I really will fight, you know, argue against those, you know, when Congress came after us and stuff like that. I think it's important for, not because of the horse show, of course, But for the others, it's important that it should. I would never tell people, you know, you ought to watch the show, because it's silly. If you like it, great. You know, if I were in college, honestly, I would watch it. I don't watch it now, but I'm 64. It's not aimed at, you know, your grandparents. But in college, it's the 1 hour escape from studying or whatever, and, you know, it's fun, it's a hoop. And I understand that, and that's all it's put on for. So I don't ever argue, you gotta watch it, it's gonna make your life better. But I did go before city councils and the government to argue against its being censored, because I believe that the arguments against shows like this are purely elitist. Now what I mean by that is, we call these shows trash. You know, we call the guests trash, as if human beings can be trash. You know, Hitler's trash, you know, people like that. But generally, human beings aren't trash. They may be poor, they may not have gone to Harvard, but they're not trash. And about 13 years ago, Princess Di was on international television. She was interviewed, I think, by David Frost. I may have that wrong. But it was a British host who interviewed her for an hour, no commercials, and it was shown throughout the world. And in that interview, Princess Di talked about cheating in her marriage, talked about having bulimia, talked about contemplating suicide. All these issues, not the suicide one on our show, but all these other issues are on everyday talk shows. And yet not one person in the world said, how dare Princess Di go on international television and talk about that. No one called her trash. Why? Because she was beautiful, she spoke the Queen's English, she was wealthy, she was a celebrity, and that's okay. It's when people are poor and unknown, and perhaps they don't look very good, by whatever our standards are, we can dismiss it. That we don't want to hear about it then. A wealthy person, a celebrity, can write books, make movies, go on The Tonight Show or Letterman, and talk about whatever they're doing. Whether it's moral or immoral, and boy, we can't get enough of it. And we buy their albums, and we go to their movies, and we buy their books, and we do it all. And yet, if it's someone who's unknown and poor, we don't want to see it. And that's why I think the argument against our show is not because of the subject matter. If you didn't like the subject matter, you would not permit news to be on anymore. You wouldn't have newspapers. You wouldn't have magazines. Do you think there's anything on our show that beats the headlines in your papers? Of course not. Every subject that I can go to your newspaper every single day and find 25 stories that could be on our show in any newspaper in America. So who are we kidding? We're being totally hypocritical. When people blast these shows for being trash, it is purely elitist. They are not complaining about the subject matter because they love the subject matter. They can't get enough of it in every other form of the media. And that was my argument about preserving the show. Everything in American television before we came on the scene, and shows such as ours, everything on American television had only one perspective: upper middle class white. All television was upper middle class white, and if you were African American, you had to be on one of the side networks. Or if you were Cosby and you had to be a doctor living in the suburbs. But the only thing you saw on television was white upper middle class. And when we had news stations, the news programs, all of a sudden wanting to be politically correct, there was always one anchor of every nationality or skin color. But they all had to speak upper middle class white English. They could not speak the dialect of their neighborhood or of their upbringing. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with an upper middle class white perspective. I was raised as that. But it shouldn't be the only perspective you get in a free media in a country as large as the United States of America. Free media ought to reflect the entire culture. And so for when you have So when you have, think of it, Friends, Seinfeld, Frasier, all the top MASH, all the top sitcoms over the last 25 years, they're all the same. They're all upper middle class white. And the truth is, not all America looks like that, and certainly not all America lives like that. So I'm not saying take those shows off. Sure, they should be on. A good portion of America is like that. But have every other part of our culture reflected in the free media as well. And that's why we fight to keep these shows. Not to tell you to watch it, but not to take it off.